Thanks for joining us on 13 Plus. I'm Cali Lichter, and this is On the Docket, a weekly recap of crime in and around West Michigan. This week, we're taking a deeper look at the case of a father who shot and killed his 2-year-old daughter and attempted to turn the gun on himself. We have his sentence today. Also this week, a murder suspect from Chicago fleeing to and caught in Holland. The details from the murder and how police tracked him down. All that and more is On the Docket. A Wyoming man was sentenced to over 3 decades in prison this week for killing his 2-year-old daughter more than 3 years ago. Sanita Parks was accused of shooting his daughter Khalees Brewer in the eye before trying to turn the gun on himself. 13 on Your Side was in the courtroom for his previous court hearings, one of which showed body camera footage from nearly 2 years ago of officers entering Parks' home, going into the room where Khalees was killed, and taking the gun from him. No video was played in court this time around, but we did hear from Khalees' family members and from Parks himself before he was sentenced in a county circuit court. I'll break down the full sentencing for you. Now, some of these clips are long, like the victim's family statements, but we feel like they need to be played in their entirities. Before sentencing, if the victim is not present due to things like death, it's common for a family member or friend to read a statement on their behalf. For Khalees, that was her aunt and her mom. Her aunt, Sharday Coleman, spoke first, and at the podium, she spoke her full statement directly to Parks. Take a listen.
Before I begin, I want to thank everyone who has played a part in this case over the last 3 years. The horrific details of Khalees' murder are ones that no one should ever have to experience. It's 1:51 on a Thursday. Khalees should be sitting in her classroom, learning, making new friends, and being an innocent 5-year-old, but instead we are here. You were supposed to be her provider. You were supposed to protect her. You were supposed to love her. Instead, you are her killer. You should have been taking her to father-daughter dances. You should have been attending school conferences. You should be bringing her roses on special occasions. Instead, you brutally ended her life. Because of you, the only roses she will ever receive were for her funeral. Because of you, she will have no dances, birthdays, or school events. Because of you, we will never experience her huge smile again. I have always heard stories of other victims reading the victim impact statement and during that moment forgiving the person. I've always wondered if I'd be able to forgive someone who committed such a horrid crime, not knowing that one day I'd be giving a statement myself. I guess I'll never understand how they were able to find it in their hearts to forgive, because over the past 3 years, I wanted nothing more than you to pay for what you have done. Courtroom justice is only the beginning of what we want. We want prison justice. I hope everything we've ever heard about and what happens to lowlifes like you who hurt children is true. And Big Bubba is everything the movies have made him out to be. This has been a never-ending nightmare for my family. I want nothing more for that smile to be wiped off your face and for you to feel even a portion of what we felt since you took Khalees' life. I know that feeling won't come from your own guilt or regret, but I hope you feel every bit of discomfort, fear, and pain from everything the prison system has to offer killers like you who have brutally murdered their own children.
Khalees' mother, Cambria Brewer, spoke next, tearfully telling the judge how she misses her little girl.
I was smart, loving, happy, beautiful, and kind. I had a smile and laugh that could brighten an entire room. Although I was mommy's first, she changed for me. After a while, I was no longer the only child. Mom had Kylie, and we barely even got 2 weeks together. You took me away from them. Khalees meant the world to me, my first child, my first heart, my first everything. She was precious, goofy, giggly, and bossy. Once she came into my life, everything changed for the better. You, Sanita Parks, took her away from me For months, I hated myself. For years, I second-guessed everything in my life. I couldn't even bring myself to trust anyone with Kylie because her father, the person who had a duty to protect, killed her. How will Kylie feel when she is old enough to understand this? What impact will this have on her life? Every night I pray to dream of her because that will be the closest I will ever the closest I will ever get to be next to her again. And I hope that in my dream, her face is just as beautiful as it was when I dropped her off and not scarred from the shot you fired into her eye. The only plausible punishment would be life, a life for life. Every time I try to believe I have forgiven you, I am reminded of that fatal shot you fired into her beautiful face.
When Judge Clay West asked Assistant Prosecutor Jerry Faber if he had any more words, Faber said he couldn't have done better than the family. The defense, on the other hand, wanted to talk about how remorseful Parks was.
This is a tragic, awful case. Mr. Parks is remorseful and very sad for what happened. He has, as the court would know from this case, has multiple mental health issues that necessitated him actually being found incompetent for many, many months. I ask court to take that into consideration in your sentencing.
Parks used his statement to apologize.
I'd just like to say I sincerely apologize to Gabrielle and her family, to my family, to the courts, and that's it for real.
Before imposing his sentence, Judge West went over the sentencing guidelines for Parks and also touched on his prior history, which played into how he sentenced him.
We've heard from our victim representatives today. You, sir, have 2 prior felonies. You were in the juvenile court system. You have 1 prior term in prison. You were on parole at the time that this happened. The upside is you've gotten your GED. But certainly the prior felonies are significant because they relate to firearms and your use and misuse of firearms. And we'll get into that more in just a moment.
And talked about the case itself, which he called horrendous.
And sir, looking back to February 9 of 2022, you shot and killed your 2-year-old daughter. You shot her in the eye. You were both naked in bed when this occurred. And you shot another bullet that went in the downstairs area and could have killed your neighbor. Well, luckily it didn't. But it's, the overlap here of just, abuse, and not just having firearms, but the abuse of firearms is horrendous. And it's a horrendous fact pattern. In this case, it was painful to read the facts. Cause of death was gunshot wound to Police's head. Manner of death was homicide. The shot was fired approximately 4 feet away. I really couldn't imagine a more difficult fact pattern to work through in the present case.
Judge West sentenced Parks for the different counts, which I'll break down in just a second. Parks was originally charged with homicide, multiple firearms charges, and 3rd offense habitual offender notice. He pled no contest in January to 1 count of 2nd-degree murder, felon in possession of a firearm, and felony firearm. Now to the charges. Parks must serve a 2-year flat term for felony firearm. A flat term means it's just 2 years, and then he'll get 3 days credit. Concurrently with that charge, he'll be serving 2 to 5 years for firearm in possession by a felon, and he'll get 2 days credit for that. And consecutive with the felony firearm and concurrent with the firearms possession, he'll serve 396 to 720 months in prison, or 33 to 60 years. And that is a lot, but to summarize, he'll spend 35 to 62 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections when you add up all the sentences with some credit and court fees. He'll be eligible for release after 35 years. And a suspect in the murder of a CEO of a Chicago area business has been found in Holland, Michigan. Police and firefighters responded to reports of smoke at a business called ATG truckload in Crestwood, Illinois last Wednesday afternoon. After putting out a small fire, first responders found the body of Dane Koletsky in the building, the CEO of that business. The suspect was taken into custody in Holland and is awaiting extradition. Here's ABC 7 Eyewitness News' John Garcia, who spoke to police back in Illinois about what happened.
There are few signs there was a fire here last week at the ATG truckload company offices, but shortly after police and fire were called to the scene, they discovered the apparent reason: the body of a man who had been killed.
So they cleared out the smoke, and then the focus became the investigation into the body.
Investigators determined the victim was the owner of the company, 46-year-old Dane Koletsky. An autopsy later determined Koletsky's neck was slashed with a knife. According to the organizer of the GoFundMe campaign to raise money for his family, including a 13-year-old son, Koletsky was well known in the Serbian community for his kindness and generosity. Nick Dimitrov worked with Koletsky for many years.
A lot of stuff I learned it from him. He was donating money, helping people, in the church, anywhere he can. He was one of the well-respected guys in the community.
When they determined this was a homicide, Crestwood police called in the South Suburban Major Crimes Task Force, which quickly identified a suspect. Police say in the hours after the murder, he apparently headed north.
Early morning on Thursday, about 5:15 a.m., that suspect was taken into custody about 2.5 hours away in Holland, Michigan.
It's unclear where the suspect may have been headed or what his motive for the murder may have been. Investigators are unable to release his name until after charges are filed, which is expected soon. But they say the suspect is a longtime employee of the trucking company.
The Holland Police Department, who actually oversaw the operation of taking him into custody, they did an outstanding job finding him and then taking him into custody.
Holland police said in a press release on their end, last week, Thursday, March 6, officers of the HDPS received notice from Cook County South Suburban Major Crimes Task Force that a homicide suspect was possibly in Holland City. GPS on the vehicle the suspect was believed to be in was showing to be at the Pilot Travel Center on M40 in Holland. Patrol officers responded and spotted the vehicle in the parking lot. The tactical team was called in while patrol officers continued surveillance of the vehicle. Once the tactical team arrived on scene, officers approached the vehicle. The suspect was removed from the vehicle and taken into custody. At this time, the police do not have details of the original incident, and questions regarding that would need to be directed to the Crestwood Police Department or the Cook County South Suburban Major Crimes Task Force. Also this week, a Grand Rapids store owner was sentenced to 60 days in jail for shooting a would-be cigarello thief. The shooting happened in 2023 at a Southeast Grand Rapids laundromat. That's when they say Jose Morin shot a teenage boy in the back after he tried to shoplift from the store. Even though the victim did not speak during the sentencing, the prosecutor says the memories of what happened that day and the bullet fragments still live with him nearly 2 years on. A Grand Rapids store owner who shot a teen he accused of shoplifting from his laundromat will spend 60 days in jail for the 2023 shooting. Jose Morin shot the then 16-year-old in the back for stealing a pack of cigarellos from behind the counter, trying to leave without paying.
Granted, it probably wasn't the smartest or best thing for him to do, to make the decision to grab something and that belonged to you and run out of the store. However, we cannot have store owners just shooting children for stealing things.
While the teen did not want to be in the courtroom and see Morin again, the prosecution told the judge about the dramatic impact of the event on his life.
He still suffers the after effects of the injuries. Perhaps that might be a very long-term, if not lifelong. Indicated that there's, at the very least, fragments of the bullet still within his body.
Before the judge sentenced Morin, his lawyer argued he didn't have a prior record, and 6 community members wrote letters in support of him.
Everybody speaks highly of him, looks up to him, as he is a valued member of the community and a very helpful member to neighbors.
Judge Christina Mims acknowledged the community support and the poor decision by the victim to steal in the first place, but she says Morin could have killed the teen by taking the law into his own hands.
He had to have surgery, and apparently he still suffers from the ramifications of your decision to shoot him in the back.
Like I said earlier, Mourne was sentenced to only 2 months in jail. He was originally charged with assault with intent to do great bodily harm, aggravated assault, and a firearms charge. He ended up pleading no contest to careless discharge of a firearm causing injury and aggravated assault. The other charges were dismissed. Coming up after this short break, Ottawa County Sheriff's Department is investigating a set of racial slurs left at a park. What a woman said after finding the slurs with children at the park coming up. A parent taking a group of children to the park earlier this week stumbled upon something she was not expecting. Taylor Briggs says she and a few other parents were taking their children to Mercury Park in Grand Haven Township. When Briggs let her 3-year-old son run in the baseball field, she found racial slurs and swastikas carved into the sand. I spoke with Briggs and Captain Jake Sparks with Ottawa County Sheriff's Office, who both say this is unacceptable. Taylor Briggs always lets her son run around the baseball diamond when she brings him to Mercury Park in Grand Haven Township. But what she saw on the sand on Monday left her concerned.
When I got up to it, I noticed that there was stuff already written in there, and it was so big I had to back up to see what it all was, and that's when I saw it.
It being racial slurs and swastikas carved into the baseball field.
And like spelled out. It's not like it was starred out or it was spelled right out for you. It's a hate crime is what it is.
Briggs says in the group she was with, all the children came from a variety of racial backgrounds, so seeing the graffiti was upsetting.
They were too young to be able to read, but had they been old enough to be able to read, like that's just not okay.
Captain Jake Sparks with Ottawa County Sheriff's Office says even though the vandalism is temporary, it still could be considered a hate crime.
It's a public park, it's a place where kids and children play, families play, and you don't want to see that. It's obviously disgusting, and we're trying to get to the bottom of who may have done it.
Sparks believes the best way to handle this situation is by having an educational discussion with the vandals, something Briggs agrees with.
It can lead to retaliation, it can lead to other exchanges, arguments, or even physical violence. And so anytime you see something like that, you want to try to get on top of it, figure it out, and talk to the people involved and before it becomes something more serious.
Briggs has lived in the Grand Haven area all her life, and she says everyone who lives there should be treated with respect.
You can't make kids feel unsafe in a community where they all were born and brought up in.
Sparks recommends calling 911 if you see something suspicious, threatening, or intimidating. All of the graffiti has since been removed. A former teacher in Manistee County is facing child abuse charges after a child at Jefferson Elementary School said they were assaulted by their teacher in January. Emily Tomaszewski was charged with 4th-degree child abuse and faced an 85th District Court judge Wednesday. Allie Baxter from our sister station Up North Live has more on what police say went down.
Calling our first case, the people of the state of Michigan versus Emily Tomaszewski.
In 85th District Court Wednesday, 34-year-old Emily Tomaszewski appeared with her attorney.
Mr. Iorio, how does your client plead to the charge?
Not guilty.
Tomaszewski was arraigned on 4th-degree child abuse charges. The judge shared that the allegations listed in the complaint against Tomaszewski spanned several months, from September 25th to December 9th, 2024.
This charge alleges more specifically that you, Emily Elizabeth Tomaszewski, did knowingly or intentionally commit the following act or acts that under the circumstances posed an unreasonable risk of harm or physical injury to a child by using physical/assaultive discipline beyond that which is reasonable or permitted by law.
According to the sheriff's office, they have video of at least one incident where Tomaszewski is accused of assaulting her student.
She's lived in Manistee for 8 years, and she has no criminal record. She poses no threat whatsoever to the public.
Given the nature of the case, I think saying that she actually presents no danger to the public is a little bit of a stretch.
A few blocks from the courthouse is Jefferson Elementary School. It's where Tomaszewski taught. Tomaszewski was first placed on administrative leave during the investigation. She later resigned. In a statement shared with families, Manistee Area Public School Superintendent Ron Stoneman said, quote, "Our top priority is and will continue to be the safety and well-being of our students."
And now to the other side of the state. Tuesday, 4 people were charged in the death of a little boy killed in a hyperbaric chamber explosion in January at Oxford Center in Troy. Thomas Cooper, a 5-year-old from Royal Oak, was pronounced dead after the chamber, which the boy was using to treat sleep apnea and ADHD, exploded. These conditions aren't among those approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for marketing of hyperbaric oxygen therapy treatment, a fact reiterated by Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, who described the boy's treatment as unsupported by medical science. The center's founder and chief executive, facility manager, safety manager, and chamber operator all are facing charges. Our Kiara Patterson took a look at the case and breaks it down for us.
Thomas Cooper, at just 5 years of age, died in an easily preventable tragedy.
5-year-old Thomas Cooper was in the hyperbaric chamber when it exploded at the Oxford Center in Troy in January. The boy was receiving oxygen treatments to help his ADHD and sleep apnea. His mother suffered burn wounds trying to save him. The explosion is believed to have been caused by a single spark igniting into a bigger fire.
This business was a pure cash flow for-profit business. The death was not justified, and that in performing the acts that caused Thomas Cooper's death, the defendant acted in a grossly negligent manner.
Oxford Center CEO Tamala Peterson, Safety Director Jeffrey Mosteller, and Manager Gary Markin are charged with second-degree murder, while operator Alita Moffitt faces charges of involuntary manslaughter and falsifying a medical record. All 4 were arraigned Tuesday.
If this is how this operation is being run, I'm so relieved that this hasn't happened before. I'm horrified for the family. I think this was foreseeable.
The FDA has approved hyperbaric therapy for several conditions, like severe burns and non-healing wounds. Nessel says it is not approved for the treatment Cooper was receiving, and the whole incident could have been prevented.
This was an unscrupulous business, operating powerful machines beyond their manufacturer's intended term of use to provide unaccredited and debunked treatments.
The lawyer of facility manager Gary Markin says he and his client recognize how tragic the incident was, but remain certain that this was an accident and not intentional. In response to the charges, Oxford Center released a statement saying in part, quote, "We are disappointed to see charges filed. Our highest priority every day is the safety and well-being of the children and families we serve, which continues during this process."
Last week, I spoke to a couple who lost their daughter to fentanyl. They spoke to me in the wake of Grand Rapids Police's largest fentanyl bust to date, where they found enough fentanyl in Daryl Mitchell's apartment to kill more than 250,000 people. Their words of warning for other families and what they want their daughter Mackenzie's legacy to be.
On March 18th, it will be 4 years since Lisa and Mike Reeves lost their 24-year-old daughter Mackenzie to fentanyl.
I said to her, "You never know when you'll get a bad batch." And she said, "Oh, Lisa, my friends will never do that to me." And months, not even that many months later, she was gone.
Mackenzie battled what her parents Lisa and Mike called demons for most of her life. Starting with lower-level drugs, they say in Mackenzie's late teens is when she started to get into harder ones.
She actually died from fentanyl, cocaine, and meth. I guess they call it a hot shot. And she died.
Mike and Lisa say their whole family tried getting Mackenzie clean.
We tried, we talked to her about it, but it's voluntary. We can't make her do it. And that's the problem.
And Mackenzie was in the process of getting clean when she overdosed. They live with that pain every day.
I just think if we could have found that one path that Mackenzie would have taken to rehab, we wouldn't be sitting here 4 years later, still with regrets. We live with those regrets every day.
While they don't want Mackenzie's memory to be shrouded by her demons,
she was like the life of the party for the most part. Everybody loved her. Mackenzie had a great personality, and I don't want her memory to be, diminished by any of this, because she was a good girl.
They have a message for people with loved ones experiencing addiction.
What I would hope is that we get back to trying to save somebody instead of waiting until they kill somebody. It's a reactive system. Let's get back to the proactive system.
Hoping Mackenzie can save another life.
It takes a very small amount of fentanyl to kill one person and is a common source of overdose across the country. Coming up shortly, we have a long interview with Grand Rapids Police Chief Eric Winstrom as we spoke about the effect the pandemic had on policing this week, marking 5 years since the COVID-19 outbreak was declared a pandemic. This week, I sat down with GRPD Chief Eric Winstrom to talk about crime and policing during the early days of the pandemic. It feels like forever ago, but this week in March 2020 was when the country shut down due to the coronavirus threat. Even though Winstrom was with the Chicago Police Department at the time, he says large cities like Grand Rapids and Chicago were impacted similarly. Here's a few minutes of our chat earlier this week.
So about this time in 2020, I remember sitting down with a group of other supervisors in the police department where I was working in Chicago, and we talked about COVID and how it was popping up, internationally, and we were thinking of things like, well, we have to cancel the St. Patrick's Parade in Chicago, and it was all very theoretical, and we didn't think it would come to that, and then lo and behold, a couple months later, it was much worse than we had anticipated. And one of the big impacts that we in policing saw was the impacts on crime. And statistically speaking, if you think about it, one of the things that went way down was burglaries. Why? Because so many people just stayed home in their house. The numbers of burglaries practically disappeared. There were no burglaries. Armed robberies and strong arm robberies declined significantly because no one was robbing a store anymore because the stores weren't open. So there was a lot of incidents where crime fell really across the country in those first few months of the pandemic. There was a lot of controversy then in the police profession of if we were going to be called upon as police officers to enforce rules that were going to be in place, mask rules or social distancing rules, or making sure that businesses were closed. And that was something difficult for us because we try and walk this line of being apolitical, not on one side or the other, and we don't get involved. But when politicians ask us, and when certainly we work for the people and the people are represented by politicians, and when we're asked to do things, sometimes it puts us in difficult situations. And it was a challenging time really across the country for, I know here in Michigan there were strong rules where I was in Chicago. Fortunately, we avoided those situations where we were putting handcuffs on people, for attending church and things like that. I don't think that took place here in Grand Rapids. It didn't take place in Chicago, but we never, in those first few months, we were unsure what direction this pandemic was going to go, and if it was going to come down to, the police department forcing people to stay in their homes. So it was a difficult time. So the numbers declined as far as overall violent crime. Now, what we saw in the profession was we started talking about, what about those unreported crimes that we're not seeing? Because people are more likely to be at home, is there an increase in domestic violence? One statistic that I saw, supposed child abuse, child sexual abuse declined. I doubt that very much that actually took place, but what happened is mandated reporters in schools, doctor's office, et cetera, they didn't have access to kids. So whereas a kid might go to school with a bruise and be the subject of a CPS and subsequently police investigation, that just wasn't happening because the kids were staying home. So we also felt like we were missing a portion of the crime that was going on. So then as the pandemic progressed and the vaccine and people started to return to work, people started to return to driving. One thing that we noticed was seemed like everyone had forgotten how to drive during the pandemic, which it's funny to say, but that's exactly, and I think a lot of Americans would agree. People were staying off the road for so long, and there was so little traffic that people were exceeding the speed limit. They weren't following the rules. A lot of places across the country relaxed rules on things like driver's license and registration, because you couldn't go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, you couldn't go to the Secretary of State's office to renew anything because you couldn't see anyone in person. So police stopped enforcing things like, valid driver's license and updated registration. Police didn't want to have face-to-face interaction with individuals, so we in police leadership told our officers, hey, make sure that whatever traffic violation is taking place is really a high level, that it's really a danger before you stop someone. So when you could kind of drift through a stop sign in front of a police officer and not even have them look the other way or try and stop you, there's something to be said for deterrence. There's something to be said for knowing that you'll be held accountable and how you drive. And once that started going down, I know certainly where I was in Chicago, and I've heard the same was here. People just started driving more recklessly. They started, disregarding rules about licensing, about registration, and I think overall, sort of a level of lawlessness took place as far as driving, and it's something that we finally turned the corner on and are coming back from. Another thing that we saw, which was sort of a symptom from the pandemic, was these illegal car meetups. So when individuals think that they can't go to a restaurant, they can't go to theater, they can't go to a bar, they look for other ways to have those social interactions. And with the ubiquity of cell phones and social media, individuals were saying, well, I might not be able to see you face to face, but why don't we all drive our cars to the same location and meet up here? Or why don't we have a party on the street at this location? And what we saw in downtowns across the country was impromptu parties springing up, and that turned into street takeovers. It turned into, drug and alcohol-fueled parties, which often turn violent, even that we've seen them here. And that's another thing. I think we finally turned the corner, and we're moving into a position where we're taking more enforcement on those. But so the trends that we saw in the crime related to COVID, where initially it went down, and then some really interesting but sort of scary changes in how people operated. Something we've never seen before. I probably won't live to see another pandemic like that again. Hopefully not. Yeah. But interesting time across the country, but certainly it really impacted how we do things in policing. Yeah, keeping officers safe started out difficult, and it just got more difficult from there. And the reason being is we didn't have enough information about the pandemic to really understand everything about it, but we had, either N95 masks or surgical masks. There's suggestion to wear gloves, but when you think about a police officer's job, there is a lot of human interaction. I know my first experience having COVID was firefighters were attempting to treat an individual who was having some sort of episode, and they called the police for help, and me and other officers went to assist them in securing this individual, getting them to the hospital. And I get a call 2 weeks later from the hospital to be alerted that this individual, who I had been very close to, who was spitting all over the place, had tested positive for COVID 2 weeks prior. I got that call while I was in bed at home suffering very badly from COVID. So it wasn't, even the testing wasn't up to date. And so one of the reasons it became extremely difficult for a lot of cops across the country, including here in Grand Rapids, is because of George Floyd's killing up in Minnesota. So we're just sort of navigating our pathway through COVID and through masks and gloves and social distancing. And suddenly, certainly in Chicago, where we saw weeks of rioting and looting, and here in Grand Rapids, it went from let's stay, a minimum of 6 feet apart to we're in a full-on riot situation. The police officers are shoulder to shoulder. They're having violent interactions with individuals. There is zero social distancing. It's the opposite of social distancing. We're needing to transport groups of police officers and National Guards members and things like that in oftentimes buses or other sort of transport vehicles, which you might have 50 individuals scrunched like this in one bus. Well, throw social distancing out the window, and whoever's got COVID on the bus, now everybody's got it. So police departments in urban areas like this throughout the country saw very quickly one individual get COVID, and suddenly half the department has it, and the next week the other half of the department has it. So I know in the department I came from, Chicago, we lost 4 officers in that time to the effects of COVID. Michigan wasn't immune from losing officers to COVID as well. So we were one of those professions like EMS that like nurses and doctors in the hospital, there's just no way to really conduct yourself in a way that you're not going to be exposed to it. Well, one thing I'll say is that one thing that the pandemic has done is made us more sensitive to communicable diseases as a whole. And you'll see every police officer in Grand Rapids has immediate access to rubber gloves, to a face mask. It's something that when I was a young officer, I never carried. And it seems something so basic and so simple, but it just wasn't a standard thing on day-to-day duty. And now, rarely will you see an officer, interact with certainly someone who might be experiencing some medical episode without putting gloves on. So that's a lesson that's learned. Certainly, what other lessons have been learned? One of the I'll call it a weird thing about being a police officer and being in this profession, and we were in one of those few professions that we actually were interacting with people every single day. We didn't have that same, I would talk to loved ones across the country who were like, man, I feel lonely, I feel so isolated, especially people that were at risk, the elderly, et cetera. Very sad. So one of the things I was thankful for was, even though I was more at risk from getting COVID, I got it very early on, I got it again. I was thankful for being able to go to work, and it was like business as usual, talking to people on a regular basis. So I'll say it brought us closer as a profession, because there were weeks, I would say, that went by, especially when the pandemic first started, that you were only interacting with people on the street and other police officers. And so we became even tighter of a family. But gloves is the short answer to that question.
We are now learning new details on a shooting near Flowerland in Wyoming a couple weeks ago, with a suspect now named and charged. Ramiko Irvin is now charged with 1 count of assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than murder or by strangulation for the March 4th shooting. He was arraigned earlier this week in 62A court in Wyoming. Court documents say Irvin shot a man 1 time in the right leg after a verbal altercation. The victim was transported to the hospital due to the gunshot wound. If convicted, he faces up to 10 years in prison or a $5,000 fine. A man was arrested last week in Portage in connection to a hatchet assault at Holiday Motel earlier this month. Officials say Dennis Ivanov Baker was charged with 1 count of assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than murder and 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon. Baker allegedly attacked a 32-year-old man at the hotel with a hatchet. We're told the victim had severe laceration-type injuries and was treated at the hospital. The attack took place around 7:30 p.m. on March 3rd. Baker was found a few hours later at a nearby business. He'll be back in Kalamazoo District Court next week for a probable cause conference. Also last week, Montcalm County deputies say a man was arrested for a bizarre series of crimes. Dalton O'Green is accused of shooting at cars a few weeks ago and then later setting his home on fire. The sheriff's department says last Wednesday it found evidence in his home linking him to the crime. O'Green was not home, but last week an off-duty deputy saw O'Green's home on fire. They then tracked him down to another home in Fairplain Township and arrested him. He's facing multiple charges, including malicious destruction of property and assault with a deadly weapon. Now back to this week, the Michigan Court of Appeals denied the appeal of a man accused of what I would classify as a gruesome homicide on South Division in Grand Rapids in 2022. In July of that year, the court says Rasheen Harris was driving on SODIV at 85 miles per hour, almost twice the speed limit, when he hit a bicycle. The force of the crash dismembered the man. According to witnesses, Harris stopped on Wilbur Street, removed the man's arm from the hood of his truck, and peed near it in the street. He then got back in the truck and left the scene covered in the man's blood. Investigators did find his BAC was more than 3 times the legal limit. He was arrested at a mobile home park in Kentwood while still covered in blood. He was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, operating a vehicle while intoxicated, causing death, and failure to remain at the scene of the accident resulting in death. He was sentenced to around 8 to 15 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. Now he's arguing that the sentence is unreasonable, but the Michigan Court of Appeals says he's going to serve the full prison time. In the opinion, the Court of Appeals ruled the original sentence was fair. They cited the impact the crash had on the victim's family, sharing testimony from his daughter. She said, "I guess my biggest thing is there are moments in our life that the defendant has taken from us that we will never be able to have. My dad's only grandson graduates in 2 years, and instead of it being a good moment and a happy moment, it's going to be overshadowed by the fact that he's not here. And it's going to make all those moments for the rest of our lives be overshadowed by the grief, which has really been hard to deal with." And if you're anything like me, you love crime shows, either real or fictional. I love when the investigator cracks a case, or after 6 seasons, the anthropologist and FBI agent finally profess their love to each other after a case. And yeah, I'm still caught up on the Bones TV show. But now, people across the nation might be saying those things about a new TV show, bringing a closer look at crime to right here in Grand Rapids. And all right, maybe not like without the romantic subplot. But this week, Deputy Chief Michael Maycroft with GRPD posted a trailer to his Facebook for a new investigation discovery show called All Access PD Grand Rapids. It's coming April 8th. The trailer boasts 24/7 unfiltered footage from the department. Take a look for yourself.
When I moved here, trust in this police department was at an all-time low. I knew I had to break down the walls. This is the most access that documentary film crews ever had to a police department. With full access, stay with me, man. You're gonna catch us being humans. Every day is completely different. You have absolutely no idea what to expect.
Please step away from the door! All Access PD Grand Rapids. All new series Tuesday, April 8th at 10. See it first on ID and stream next day on Max.
I'll have the breakdown of the first episode in a few weeks, and trust me, I will be sat. You can watch the first episode on Tuesday, April 8th on the ID network at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. It will also stream the next day on Max. And that was this week on the docket. Now we have a lot more information on our website, 13onyourside.com, about the latest on crimes and courts to fill you in between the episodes. For now, I'm Cali Lichter, and this has been On the Docket.